Thank you very much for the opportunity to talk to you, and I've really enjoyed the talks this morning, and what I've really enjoyed is listening to really clever people talk about advances and where the science is headed. But if you're like me, when you hear clever people talk, the critical brain starts going and you start asking different questions, and a couple of questions have come up for me. And if anyone's running a sweep in the audience, here are a couple of my answers. I think Professor Crow is about 120 years old. I think Peter is about 350. I think both of them are going to be in a Marvel movie sometime in the next 10 to 15 years, and I hope they're going to be the good guy, not the bad guy. I'm going to talk for about 8 minutes. I'm going to talk about childhood obesity, but I'm also going to talk about solving complex and social problems, and that's one of the threads that I think goes through everything you've just heard. The other thread that goes through everything you've just heard is what is your responsibility. So you're hearing us talk about our work and how we think and all of those sorts of things. I want you, as I'm talking and as you reflect on today and as you go back into the real world, to ask the question, how do I fit into this? What is my role in what I've heard so far today? So neither Peter or I want to frighten you about aeroplanes, but I'm going to use an aeroplane metaphor as well. And I'm going to give you a pay raise. So it's 7 o'clock on a Friday morning. You're all prepared to come here and listen to 4 people, and you don't even really know who was going to be on the stage. So you're prepared to take risks, you're very clever, you're go-getters, you're prepared to get up early. You're probably going places. So I'm going to promote you now and get it over and done with. You're now the Health Minister for Australia, and you're the Chief of Stopping Bad Thing Happening. You're the Chief of stopping bad stuff. And you're in the briefing on Friday morning at just after 10 o'clock, so it's the next thing you do after a wonderful talk from 4 people. And your Chief of Staff comes in, they says, we've got a problem. What's that, you say? Well, an aeroplane's just arrived at Tullamarine. And on that aeroplane, we've discovered there's a highly contagious virus. Not Ebola, thankfully, because we now have a vaccine for that, but a highly contagious virus. And the projections are it's going to affect 2/3 of the adult population by Monday. And in affecting 2/3 of the adult population, it's going to reduce life expectancy by about 20 years. And our estimate is that this disease will cost the economy about $60 billion in the next year. You're responsible for the health of the population. What do you do? What would we do if we were faced with this situation? We'd close down the borders, we'd bring out the National Guard, we'd close every side street, we'd have royal inquiries, we'd go nuts to make sure this thing didn't spread any further than Tullamarine. This is exactly what obesity is to Australia today, last year, next year, and the year after, and we do nothing. 2/3 of the adult population in Australia is overweight or obese. It reduces life expectancy by about 20 years, and it costs our economy $60 billion a year. Is our response adequate to that or not? Peter told you the story about ageing, and we may live to be 30,000, I think was what he said. And as he showed this graphic, he showed as you age, actually a fairly healthy ageing pattern. But in fact, what we know is that kids who are unhealthy, and particularly kids who are overweight and obese, have overweight and obesity as kids. That translates into adulthood. Once a kid is on that trajectory of being overweight or obese, an unhealthy weight, they're very, very likely to be an overweight or obese adult. You may have one thought in your mind of someone who's been able to turn that around, but it's not unusual, it's normal, it's typical for an overweight or obese kid to become an overweight or obese adult. Overweight and obesity tracks from childhood into adulthood. And when I was a kid, prevalence in my primary school cohort, and the kids I went to primary school with, about 1 in 10 of us, 8% or so, were overweight and obese. And that's tracked through into adulthood, where about 2/3 of us as adults, 2/3 of us are overweight and obese. $60 billion a year, every year, 20 years of life expectancy, without talking about the associated suffering from heart disease, diabetes, a range of cancers, and so on and so on. Now let me tell you this. Our studies in kids in Victoria tell us that the prevalence of overweight and obesity amongst our kids in primary school right now, within 10 kilometres of where we're sitting, is between 35 and 50%. There are kids in grade 4 in our communities right now who you go past on the train and in the bus, the grade 4 girls, 50% of them are overweight and obese, and it affects their ability to learn, their social skills, their mental health, their career prospects, their chances for educational attainment. And we do nothing about it. The crime, the disaster, the crisis is that this problem is 100% preventable. And if it was something that happened over the space of 24 hours and caused a crisis, we would throw every resource we had at it. This problem is 100% preventable. And some of the examples of that are small trials to date that have been done in Victoria, on the left in kids in preschoolers, in under 5s, where they got between a 2 and 3% reduction in a 2 or 3 year period of time in childhood obesity. In primary school kids in the town called Colac in Western Victoria, over a 2 to 3 year period, significant reductions in waist circumference and weight amongst these kids. And in adolescent kids in Geelong, 5% decrease in adolescence. It is 100% preventable. These trials each ran for a period of time, about 18 months to 2 years, took ages to get funded, took ages to get on their feet. They ran them, then they finished, then we collected the data. It took ages to analyse the data. 3 years after we'd finished the trial, we were able to say, do you know what, that actually worked. 3 years after the trial's finished, nobody cares. 3 years in Australia is 7 or 8 prime ministers at the minute. There have been thousands of attempts to prevent childhood obesity. There have been 4 or 5 successes. 3 of them have been in Victoria. A 4th one has been in the ACT. And the dose, the magic, the thing on the spoon, the thing that makes these interventions different to every other attempt to prevent childhood obesity is that the initiative, the intervention, was to build the capacity of these communities to respond to the problem. Not a nerd in a pair of glasses coming from outside and saying, oh, you've got a big problem and this will solve it and off you go, best of luck. But to work with those communities to say to them, is this a problem you want to solve? Do you understand how this problem works? Can we work together to find solutions? Are those solutions working? Can we embed what you're doing and make it normal? This is really the basic classic problem of preventing obesity. We think of it as incredibly simple. Tim's got 9 keys to living to 100 million. And even those are incredibly complex things to deliver, very simple things to talk about and very hard things to achieve. If I asked you, each of you, to think for a minute, I'll give you 1,000 healthy kids at birth, and you have to give them advice on their lifestyle to get them to the age of 20 so that they're healthy. What 3 things would you tell a bunch of healthy kids to ensure they stay healthy? You all thought of 3 things straight away. You thought, eat well, be active, look after your mental health, make sure you're in a good family, make sure you get educated, and so on and so on. We know what has to happen to keep our kids healthy. The question is not what, but how. The question is not what, but how. And one mistake we've made is we go, oh, it's all about energy balance, right? It's simple. It's just we'll focus on one side of this energy equation, so it must be sugary drinks. So tell the kids not to drink sugary drinks, give them a water bottle, job done. And we ignore all the other things that happen to a kid. So we tell a kid in a classroom, how about you drink water? Here's a water bottle, best of luck. Turns out the water doesn't taste very nice. The school's right next to a 7-Eleven that has $1 big gulps for the next 6 months. Every time they get on the train to go home, there's advertising for Big Macs and so on and so on and so on and so on. And in fact, we've oversimplified this to the point where we can't understand it. Completely the opposite to what we were trying to do. We were trying to boil this down to its very basic, simple components and pick one. And it's a mistake. So the world's experts got together. They had a lovely time saying, you know what, our model's a bit simple. It's a bit too straightforward. Actually, probably it's slightly more complicated than we first thought. And if we're going to tackle this, we'd better get our heads around the complexity of this thing. So how about we draw a more realistic picture of the causes of overweight and obesity than our energy balance model that we're using now? So the world's experts got together and they did that and they said, right, I think we've nailed the simplified model. And here is their simplified model of the causes of obesity. Now, it's still got energy balance in the middle there, and this is called the foresight model. It's fairly old news now. It's called the foresight model before 9 p.m. in our lab. It's got a very different name after 9 p.m. It's really very helpful for a couple of reasons, though. The first is, if you're going to deal with energy balance and you think you're going to pick one behaviour and ignore all of the other things in this picture, well, of course you're going to fail. You're bound to. This is not a linear problem. We can't assume that if we fix A, it'll fix B, and therefore C will be solved. If we fix A, B fights back, and E comes in and says, hang on a second, you can't take my market share, I'm going to bump up my marketing and I'm going to reduce the cost of soft drink. But the way we do our science is, how about we randomise everything else out except my dose, which is to give them one thing at one point in time, and if it doesn't work, well, it doesn't work. And we waste millions doing that. So if the dose, the magic, the thing on the spoon is to give the community the ability to understand the problem and respond, then we have to give the community the tools to make sense of this beast and use it in their response to the problem. And here is an unreadable map, and it makes no sense to you whatsoever. This is how the leaders of the community of Portland in Western Victoria see the problem of childhood obesity in their community. This is how the leaders and 200 members of that community understand all of the different drivers of childhood obesity in their community as a part of a project to say, can we understand the beast? Can we understand the complexity? And if we can, how do we as a community shift things so that we get a solution that works? And in the same line as the conversation we've just had, you know what, I want a silver bullet. I just want to know what the solution is. Gosh, our kids are overweight and obese. It's really terrible. What single program do I buy? What single dose do I give them? What's the single thing we do to solve this problem? And the problem is there is no single thing. This is an incredibly complex problem. And here is this community understanding for themselves which part of this is possible to solve. In these communities, we run a monitoring program whereby we measure data with 90% of the kids. We know what's going on with these kids. And we ask this community, 200 people, if this is the beast, this is the evidence, how do you fit into a solution? Not who are we going to ask to come and help us? Not why hasn't the government solved this? Not which funding body is going to come and run a single program. How do all of our assets fit together to get the best possible solution for this community? As I mentioned, we measure these kids, and we're 2 years into this piece of work at the moment, and hand on heart, we know that these kids are getting healthier. More and more of them use active transport to get to school. More and more of them are eating enough fruit and veg to convey a health benefit. More and more of them are drinking enough water to convey a health benefit, and less of them are drinking sugar-sweetened beverages. We know anecdotally, and I think it might have been public now, we know that Coca-Cola has changed the expectation of their marketing department in terms of the sales of drinks from sugary drinks to watery drinks in this region because the community demand has changed. I think overnight there was news that Coke is reformulating and marketing on the point that we're hearing you, community, and we're taking sugar out of our products. So, traditional approach to solving a complex problem, crumbs it's complex, randomise everything out, pick one intervention, drop it in one place in the community, hope for the best, wonder why it didn't work. What if a whole community responded and instead of one action in one part of a system, we had lots of actions across lots of parts of a system? And that's the question we ask this community. And alongside these significant changes in behaviours, they are seeing childhood obesity reduce in their kids. And now I want to show you the horrible, terrible spaghetti diagram again. And this one's called the spaghetti and meatballs. The spaghetti is the way this community sees the problem, with the question being, if that's the beast, how do you fit into a response? 6 months later, we went back to the community and said, okay, so we've worked together a bit, you've got on with it, what's happened? Each of these dots represents one separate activity run by groups of members of the community to do something about this problem. Look at the difference between a single program dropped in one place and asking a community to take ownership and leadership over a significant problem. What you can also see in the spaghetti and meatballs is the big yellow plates. What the big yellow plates show is where the data from the kids that we measured shows we've got a significant effect, a significant change, a health improvement in behaviours. What can you see? Where these communities have made the effort, where the most effort is being made, they're getting the biggest response. NHMRC funded, statistically significant, best possible science. This community is winning the battle. What else do you see? There's parts of this map where there's a whole bunch of dots and no plate, no shaded bit, no significant change in behaviour. What's that all about? The one on the left there is participation in sport. Primary school kids, about 95% of them participate in sport. There is no improvement to be had. But this allows us to ask the question and have the conversation, are we spending our effort in the right place? Look at the map again. Where are there no dots? We look at the blue area down the bottom, there's no dots there. Why? This community said this is a really important part of this problem. We should really tackle as much as we can. There's no dots down the bottom here. And that's the marketing of junk food to kids. It's outside the remit of this community to handle it as a major problem today, but not necessarily tomorrow. So these communities, I want you to look them up. They have their own web pages. I want you to support them. I want you to big them up. I want you to find ways of telling other people about them. We need a social movement that says this disaster is solvable and these people are the heroes and are at the front of these solutions. Sea Change, which is in Portland, 227 actions identified, 205 already enacted. Generate Change, which is in Hamilton, 146 actions identified and 122 enacted. Colac about to get on its feet and do this. And we have a waiting list of about 60 communities around the country. We're doing work in Northern Victoria, Sydney, Vancouver, across Europe, in Auckland and around and around and around. And the point is, there is no argument that we want our kids to be healthier. There is no argument that given the right opportunities and the right tools, we wouldn't do whatever it took to improve the health of the next generation. Not what, but how. Let me put that a different way. What did I say before? I said, right, we've got a problem, we need to know what to do about it. Crumbs, what do we do? Who do we go to? Who is going to solve this for us? What do we ask the health department to do? Let's get funding, let's run one program. Let's use a bloody apple as a logo, for God's sake. Let's use an apple as a logo and let's train one person in one agency in one part of the community to run a 12-month program to try and improve one behaviour in these kids. And then let's wonder why it didn't work. What if we could create an ecosystem for prevention? What if instead of outsourcing my responsibility for the health of our kids, 50% of them overweight and obese, 20 years of life expectancy, hundreds of billions of dollars in cost by the time these kids are adults. What if normal was healthy? What if the ecosystem we create for these kids in the next generation is deliberately created to be healthy, instead of laying down and letting things happen to us? What if we stand up and said, we can help our kids be healthy and we want to? And let me finish it this way. How do you fit into that response? Thanks very much.